Hello and good evening and welcome to Tuesday evening here. This is Pastor Lane Nelson at Eastside Lutheran Church. It is a joy to be with you. We gather like this on Tuesday evenings. We talk about faith and we learn from others and we think about what that might mean for ourselves as we enter into this series that is called Together in Faith. Also, on these Tuesday nights, we usually comment about the weather. Last week, it was just too darn cold. And you might recall, if you were here, I was sitting with my toque on. And I do not have my toque on tonight because it's gorgeous as I look out towards my window. It has been so nice to see warmer weather, even if it means that the snow here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota is melting, causing streams in the street and getting my car filthy. Yeah. If there is anybody out there tonight, please join in the comments. Let us know that you are here. Maybe you are simply out there enjoying a nice evening, walking your dog or what have you. But you will also see that Pastor Joel is right next to me, and so we will let him say a hello to everybody as well.
I don't know. I kind of feel like it's kind of nice to be your Ed McMahon to.
Oh Lord!
So I just kind of in the background, just kind of giving the hearty laugh though. Oh.
That's hilarious.
I'm thinking there's half of the people watching right now get that reference, and half of them are like, Ed who?
Ed McMahon. I feel like that should be the Swami now. A dog and its owner. Yeah. Who is watching the show tonight? Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Hey, we do have a few people who are joining the conversation. Let me say hi to my cousin Renee up in North Dakota and Judy in Arizona. I bet your night is even better than ours. Hello to Karen and to Carol and to Irene and to Colleen and to Dixie and to Miss Susan. Oh my goodness, so nice to hear you or to see you on the screen, Susan. Hope all's going well in your life in Madison. We have been talking about other faiths, and we've been looking at denominations and other Christians. We've been looking at other world religions. But now we are entering into the season of Lent, and so we are doing something a little bit different. So what are we doing at Eastside Lutheran Church this Lent, Joel?
Yeah, we're doing a daily reading of a chapter of the epistles.
Yes.
So
what's an epistle?
It's those letters that were written in the early church after the Gospels, or at least they happen chronologically in the Bible as you're paging through the Bible.
Yep.
After the Gospels in the New Testament. And so we're reading a chapter a day for 40 days, the 40 days of Lent.
That's a long time.
Yeah, but it's actually, I haven't read it this way, and it's been really fun to read as a community.
Yeah.
And so we have, now this marks the 6th day, and so therefore the first, the whole book of Galatians. Today was the last chapter 6 of Galatians. And so we get to talk today about what's going on in Galatians.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
40 days of Lent do not include Sunday, so if you start with Ash Wednesday, you get Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then skip Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So for those of you who've been paying attention, today we have just finished the book of Galatians. I threw the little reading schedule up there for us to take a look at. So thank you for that. But there's so much more than that, and you are being a little kind. Not only are we reading through the books of the Bible together, but there is also the ability to have them come to you. Now, I throw this up here so that you can see the website, but there is a link posted in the description tonight that speaks that will take you directly to a spot where you can get daily emails about what we're reading. And again, I want you to describe that, because this is something you've created.
Yeah, so the link there that Pastor Lane just had up is a good way to sign up if you would like to receive these. If you want to both sign, in the description, there's a link there for ES Lent 2001, and that's 2021, sorry, 2001. Where am I? And so there you can use that link that's in the description to see the archive of the daily emails that have been sent so far, including little community discussion questions that have been really, really lovely to hear from folks over the course of these last 6 days. And so you can see those archives. Each day is an email and a Facebook post that has the chapter that we're reading, and then just a brief little discussion question, or maybe a poll about what was your favorite part of today's reading. And it's just been really lovely to interact with folks, really from all over. Not just folks, East Siders, but people who are kind of connected in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
Have been commenting, and so you can see all of that via those links. And if you want to catch up with us, now would be a great time to start if you even weren't a part of the first 6 days, because we're going to start reading a whole new book, Ephesians. And so now would be a great time.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay,
Right, yeah.
Good.
But if you have not scanned through Eastside's Facebook page recently, there is a 1.5-minute video that Pastor Joel created that looks at our stained glass windows, and he has blacked them all out or whited them all out so that they don't have the color, and then you can download those and fill those in as a coloring book using our own church windows. But the video that he put together, to me, is just as fascinating as it all kind of fills in behind him. It was like some kind of crazy magic thing he's doing there, so it's worth your time to pay attention to. We want to say a couple of highs out there. Hi to Miss Connie. I am so glad that your power is back on and that life is getting back to the 20th century in Houston. So fun to visit with you the other night. Hello. Also to Dorothy and to Kay, and maybe Carrie is with you. I do not know. Also to Dick and Cheryl, nice to have you here. Colin and Harriet, Ma and Pa up in Botno, and Marlis. My goodness, what a wonderful group and community here as we're entering into this Lenten discussion. Well, as mentioned, we are together in faith, and our topic is Galatians. We're looking at some of those books that we don't often read and talk about so much in worship, those letters or those epistles, and the first one is Galatians. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Galatians, and then what's going on in our own present day as we deal with some of those same themes that were happening. But as I do that, I'm going to pose this question here. Look at that. It's right above Pastor Joel's head. Nice. So if you have some thoughts on Galatians, or even a phrase or a word, go ahead and throw that up in the comments and just let people know what you're thinking as you go through these 6 chapters. That was just too funny. Wow. We'll put that up again later just for fun.
All right.
But what is Galatians? Okay, so Galatians, of course, is a letter, and it was written by the Apostle Paul to the churches in Galatia. Now, a lot of the books that get attributed to the Apostle Paul in the New Testament weren't necessarily written by him, but this one is pretty clear that it was written by Paul, and he even speaks in the end about how it was written in his own hand, really big, kind of like a John Hancock kind of a signature thing. And there's probably at least 3 churches that have started up there who he's communicating with. Now, these are people who are not Jewish people. These are folks who are living away from Jerusalem, so people in the Gentile world, which feeds into some of the themes we're going to be touching on here in just a bit. Now, when was it written? Depends on who you talk to, who you read. They'll give you various dates, anywhere from the late 40s to the mid-50s. So this is probably 20-ish years after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, which feeds into some of these same controversies.
Mid-40s, early 50s.
Yep.
Poodle skirts.
No, not the 1950s. It's not sock hop we're doing here. This is the world here. This is a map of the Galatia region. If you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, you see the name Jerusalem. Okay, so there's the Holy Land down in that corner. And if you go to the opposite corner, you can see the boot that we know today as Italy. And then kind of right in the, let's say, 2 o'clock area is Galatia, or what we think of more often today as Turkey. So it would be some of these communities that are located in that corner of the world. This comes, of course, from Nelson's Complete Book of Bible Maps and Charts, 1996, which is just me and I have a crazy attraction to maps, and so maps are helpful to me. They kind of place where we're talking about in the world. So anyway, so this is the Jesus movement that took place in and around the Jerusalem area, now spreading up and connecting with people in Galatia. So that puts us spatially in the world, but we have to ask that question, okay, what's going on? Say that together with me on 3. 1, 2, 3. What's going on? Now, the message of Jesus is just beginning to spread, as we mentioned, and it's going to these new groups of people living in new places. The church is still in its infancy. It still wasn't even a church at this time, really. It was more of a movement within Judaism. And so people are trying to figure out, what does that mean? And for the people who are of the Jewish faith, they're saying, this is the promised Messiah who's finally come. Hear all about him. And people who are outside the Jewish faith are going, who's this Jesus guy and what does that mean? So there's still all of this defining that's happening. And so they're trying to put some parameters on their understanding, their belief, who's in, who's out. What does that mean? And as we can see in Galatians in particular, not even the leaders of this movement were on the same page yet. Paul and Peter, who were these big names now for us 2,000 years later in the church, are leaders who are themselves trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes they butt heads, which is natural, I suppose. So, what are they arguing about? Well, the big question is, do these new converts to this faith, which is at the time a version of Judaism now, do these new outsiders, because we know a lot of the Gospels, it's about insiders versus outsiders.
Yep.
Do these new outsiders need to really become Jewish, or at least follow Jewish practices to really be considered believers of Judaism? So, what defines if you're really Jewish or not? Drum roll. Ouch! Circumcision. It was a defining physical distinction between insiders and outsiders, and not just circumcision, but then all of the stuff that comes with that, the practices, the festivals, all of the different laws. Do you have to follow all of those kinds of pieces to really be a part of this new Jesus movement that's going on in the world? And so that's the tension to which Paul starts writing this book of Galatians, because these churches have gotten started up there. They have some history with who Paul is and what he's saying. And then others have come along and said, whoa now. This is great that you're learning and liking Jesus. But if you really are going to do this, you need to follow the rules. And one of those is you need to get circumcised, which is not popular among adult males now or then. But then also follow all of the other stuff that comes with it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if this were like, how to be Lutheran, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like you think about like, okay, so you have to go through the baptism of lutefisk, and like, no, the Germans like, no, I'm sorry, it's all about the bratwurst and the sauerkraut. No, it's about the lutefisk and the lefse. So sorry, right? They're having these kinds of cultural things wrapped up in. So what's the identity of my faith? What's the identity of my culture?
Yep.
Where do they overlap? Where do they not?
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. Now let's look at a little more closely. And if you have like a favorite verse, well, why don't you talk? You asked that question this week. What are people's favorite verses? And while you're doing that, I'm going to grab a little notebook.
Oh, okay. All right. So, so some of the questions asked throughout the week were some of the, like, what are some of the themes that that you enjoyed most in, say, like, chapter 2, but then in chapter 5, which was just a day ago, I asked if you could only take one verse, which verse would you keep out of chapter 5? And we had, I think, I can pull it up here on my computer, but we had, I think, 6 different people, or 6 different verses come out of those, and I'm just going to look and see, because the number 1 verse was actually verse 25.
Verse 25.
Yeah.
525?
525 came out as the verse that was most often said to be the favorite. And that verse is really simply, if we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Mm-hmm. So that became the number 1 verse. But 9.1% of people,
Yeah.
meaning one person, but 9.1% who answered the survey said they did like a circumcision verse, and that was
Really?
verse 6, for in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts. Dot, dot, dot,
Sure,
dot, dot.
sure.
So, it was really, really interesting to just kind of see what would be your go-to. What's the theme that you pull out by verse? So,
Yeah.
really, really fun to kind of just connect with people and find out what your favorites are. What are the things that are resonating?
Yep. There's a lot in this book of Galatians because it's that explanation of what does it really mean to follow this new movement, and what does it mean for those who have had this more traditional Jewish background to now live with other people. Do we have to all follow these same practices? What's important? Yep.
So you're looking up some of your notes?
Yeah, I'm just kind of glancing at some of the things that stuck out for me. I mean,
Sure.
it starts out in good Pauline fashion.
Right.
He kind of talking about who he is, and then he jumps in right away. It's kind of a hot writing. I mean,
It is.
he comes out hot at people, and while I did not meet the Apostle Paul, from some of his writings you can get the impression that he was not pulling many punches with people. He jumps right out and says, "What are you doing? You're doing it wrong. Change this." At points. He's kind of scolding people here. And one of the things that I found fascinating in Galatians, and I don't know why, I hadn't really thought about it as much before maybe, is that how he kind of comes at Peter. Now in present day 2021, Peter takes a pretty high standing in us. And in fact, the Roman Catholic Church, with the Pope being based off the office of Peter,
Right.
you know, we put maybe some undue prestige, lift him pretty high on a pedestal. But it was crazy how Paul says, "Peter, what are you thinking? You're doing this wrong, you know? What are you doing? You used to be teaching people that there's freedom of the gospel, and now all of a sudden you're agreeing with these Judaizers," is the term they use, and Judaizers would be a term that means people who follow all of the Jewish practices. You're agreeing with these people who say that we have to do all these things or put the weight of the law back on us and go about all the rules. No, there's freedom in the gospel, and so get it straight.
Right.
And later they would meet again in Jerusalem and kind of sort all this out. But I mean,
yeah.
he was just coming at him. I thought that was just fascinating. Yep. How about yourself as you go through this? Now, I have to admit, our practices, we're reading one chapter a day,
Yep.
Monday through Fridays, taking Sundays off, and then, last week, maybe like some of you, I got busy and I did not necessarily do it one chapter at a day. I got them
Sure.
all read by today, of course,
Sure.
but I had to put a couple of days together, once, maybe twice.
Yeah.
So hopefully you don't feel that that's a rule that you have to follow or a weight of the law that if you miss a day, you're out of the study.
Yeah, don't be an East Side Lutherizer.
Yeah, there you go.
An
An East Siderizer. Siderizer. Yeah. What jumped out at you, Joel, as you were thinking of all of these things?
Well, yeah, I think your point about Paul coming in hot is really interesting because, what we consider Paul, right, and the early church considered Paul to be an apostle.
Yep.
No one, I think, would confuse him with a pastor.
Okay, yeah. Hey, that's a very helpful distinction. That's a very helpful distinction.
Yeah. So he definitely doesn't. So I have this friend who is a really well-known kind of speaker and author, and have a book of his on a shelf. His name is Bob, and Bob, when Bob and I were talking at one point, he said, when I read Luther's book on the Galatians, I think I might be Lutheran.
Huh.
And Bob is a very committed, non-denominational, powerful Christian guy.
Yep.
He says, when I read Luther's book on the Galatians, I think I might be Lutheran.
And what does he mean by that?
So he just really found so much to agree with.
Sure.
So Luther wrote a commentary in the 1500s on the book of Galatians, which is a really powerful way to, as you've been reading this, if you're wondering about like, well, what is the kind of Lutheran take on what Paul is saying here?
Yep.
And so when Paul comes in hot, like you say, Luther starts taking that because Luther comes in hot. In fact, Luther really likes Paul a ton. In fact, he attributes Paul's writings and the epistles to the revitalization of his faith and the Reformation.
Some churches focus on the writings of John and others, but you're right. Us Lutherans, we're Pauline through and through.
Yeah, and so a good way to kind of get at this kind of hotness is to think about some of the stuff that Luther wrote, because Luther was having some fights with others in the church.
Yeah, right, okay.
In fact, I mean, it wouldn't maybe be too much to think about as Luther being Paul in the same way that he was fighting with the Pope, who was in the office of Peter.
Sure.
And it's an interesting dynamic to think about that.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. I don't know that fight exists today, especially with our Catholic siblings now, and there's a lot of commonality that we find with our Catholic siblings now. There's certainly still differences, but it is interesting to think about the formation of our tradition as I think we can see some of those commonalities in Galatians. Yep. It's great.
Yep. No, there's this real argument that Paul makes in Galatians about how the gospel frees us from all of the things of the law that were holding us down. Because, of course, we could not live into the perfection of the law as humans in our sinfulness. And while our Jewish brothers and sisters talk about how the law is a guide and is itself a means of God's grace because it lifts that, there was an understanding of it that, I mean, you needed to follow the rules or you were doing it wrong and you were, scorned upon by God. And Paul is saying, no, you are freed from all of those things. Instead, you're called to live in love. But once you start backsliding and once you start taking on some of these things, like once you get circumcised, as an example, again, ouch, but once you start taking those other things on, then it becomes an entrapment, and you find if you're gonna be in for an inch, you better be in for a mile, and you're gonna have to do the whole thing, and then pretty soon this gospel message is lost, and it becomes about us trying to earn our salvation again, and to stay away from that is what we need to do so that we can experience salvation as gift.
Right.
And not get tempted to think it's something we do ourselves. Which here's where I had my own turmoil with this reading of Galatians, because I love a good Lenten discipline. I love to either take something on for the season of Lent or to give something up for the season of Lent. Personally, I find it gives me something to focus on for this 40-day period, but it also then reminds me of things. And maybe I just like feeling guilty if I screw up. Maybe, who knows? I grew up in North Dakota. But as I read this piece and I hear Paul kind of jumping on the Galatians and even Peter, I think, well, geez, is there something wrong with my own love of a good Lenten discipline? Am I wanting to have the rule of the law around me, guiding me and forcing me in this direction? And I kind of have been wrestling with that because, I've given something up for Lent. That's just kind of what I do. Which maybe where some of these Judaizers were coming through is this is what you do. This is what religion is all about. You follow these rules and you celebrate these festivals and you all of that stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about it, because Paul talks about we have freedom, but just because we have freedom doesn't mean that we are free to be servants to one another, right? He talks about these kinds of freedom to serve is the freedom that we have in Christ. But that service, the freedom of the point that you were making about if I'm doing this practice, is this practice engaged in the freedom of Christ, or is it engaged as a way to earn some kind of favor?
To be a better follower of Jesus.
Yep. Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and no one can answer that except you on some level. But it's a great question that we all can ask ourselves about. And Lent is a season where we get to ask this, where those questions are to the surface. Yep. It's just a lovely way to think about the season of Lent as a season when we ask ourselves the hard questions about what is our motivation. Why am I living the way I'm living? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Is this an outpouring of Christ in my life, or is this an outpouring of my own desire to serve my own need, to earn my own salvation? And there's lots of ways that are subtle that aren't that big as that, but still, asking those questions of ourselves, that's what this season is about. And I love that.
Yeah. Now, I'm still following these Lenten disciplines after reading Galatians for that point, because I think that, at least I hope in my heart of hearts, that I'm approaching this from a way to be drawn closer to this walk of faith through this, and not because I'm trying to earn or be a better, religious person.
Right.
So,
but
I think asking that question of oneself is a healthy thing to do in this context or whatever context we find ourselves.
Yeah. And Paul would boast about some of that. He would see the scars I bear.
Yeah, isn't that so funny? Because he's just been ripping on all of these people, and then he hits Galatians 5:1, and for freedom Christ has set you free. And then right after that he's saying, and give me a break, because I'm good at what I do, and look at my body because of that.
It's like words.
And then I found it also ironic here that after all of this argument about not being trapped by the works of the law, he then flips it, if you will. I think it's in 5, where he starts talking about the things that you should stay away from. At the end here, 5 and 6, he says, but don't be involved with fornication, and don't do this, and don't be that. And I think it's fun. He even puts envy and things like that are so natural for some of us, right on the same level as all of these other things that we often think of as super bad, like fornication and whatnot. They're all on the same level to him.
Right.
But I found it interesting. He says, don't do all of this, instead do all of this. So we have this interesting way that Paul is approaching the people in the region of Galatia. Don't be trapped by the law, but on the other hand, do all of this stuff.
Right.
But I think what's really happening is be freed from all of these trappings that are really more rote and that don't earn you any salvation, and that are holding you back because you're trying to obey all of them, and instead be freed so that you can live this way instead, which is loving your neighbor as yourself. As he touches on here, it's 5:14. The law in one commandment, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Which again, very Christocentric, very much words of Jesus, very reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount.
I was I referenced, I think, a couple weeks ago in a sermon, Galatians verse, because of the use of the word kairos.
Kairos,
And so that it gets translated as time in lots of places, but here in Galatians, we translate it into English as opportunity. And so that's in chapter 6, where Paul is saying, take every opportunity to do good. But that goodness is a response to the goodness of Christ. That it's not a work, but it is our response. And so that kairos thing, time, take every opportunity, that there is an abundance of opportunities to live in gratefulness and gratitude and joy to Christ in your life. It's beautiful stuff.
I put a little note here down as kind of I was thinking, okay, well, how would I sum up Galatians? And this is probably not accurate, but it's what came to me in the moment. Don't live by the law of restriction. Live instead by the law of Christ, or the law of love, which then is a way of really living by the fruits of the Spirit. Anyway, I really enjoyed going through the book of Galatians, and I'm now excited to jump into the next one, which, of course, will be Ephesians, which we start tomorrow and which we
Yep.
will be talking about here next Tuesday as well. So if you want to do a little prep, you can start reading a chapter a day. For those of you who will be tuning in on Facebook Live Wednesday night, which would be tomorrow if you're watching live, we will be preaching on the book of Galatians, and that will be the center of our worship. We have a really nice Lenten service that our music director, Dr. Tom Krause, has put together, and so I hope you're a part of that. It'll be at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. But it is approaching time when we draw to a close, and we have this practice of doing just that. I want to say thank you again to everybody who is a part of this conversation, and I see that Shar has been in. Both Shar Van Bakker and Shar Muller are present, as well as Alice and Claudia. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And Judy's comment here is maybe a nice one to close with too. You have to love yourself so that you can show love to others. Hopefully, wherever you are at tonight, whatever the weather is like tonight, and whatever your Lent looks like, you are in a place where you know the love of Christ in your own life, that you are not alone, and that this God who Paul is so passionate about in the person of Jesus Christ, that you know that love yourself, and that you know that you are a part of this family of God. And we're not perfect, and even Peter, as we saw, was not perfect, but together in faith, we go through this walk with one another. So know that you are loved. May God make himself very, very present to you in tangible ways. And let us close with prayer. I give thanks to you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously protected me today. And I ask you to forgive me all my sins where I have done wrong, and graciously protect me tonight. For into your hands I commend myself, my body, my soul, and all that is mine. Let your holy angel be with me, so that the wicked foe may have no power over me. Amen. And may you go to sleep quickly and quietly and cheerfully, and a little bit closer in your walk of faith. Good night.
Good night.